Mr. President, I rise today to reiterate my objection to Donald Trump's EPA nominations and Republicans' unprecedented attacks, not only on California's climate leadership, but on the rules and procedures of this body. But before I do that, I need to first address what's unfolded in my hometown of Los Angeles over the last several days. Now, in my opinion, it's not a coincidence. After one of the most embarrassing weeks, to be sure, of the Trump presidency, as the public has continued to learn the truth about the budget reconciliation bill that would cut health care for so many working families across the country in order to pay for further tax breaks for the most wealthy in America. I'm sure he didn't appreciate us shining the light on that, as we continue to see the impact of his failed tariff wars and the increasing costs on those same working families. And of course, the attention that his breakup with Elon Musk got. It was not a good week for the president. And so just as he'd done so many times before, when things are going bad, when all else fails, what does he do? Classic Trump playbook. He turns to scapegoating immigrants. And he decided that this was the time to launch indiscriminate ICE raids throughout the Los Angeles region, clearly not just targeting criminals, but so many others. ICE raids in workplaces in an attempt to manufacture a crisis. Colleagues, for the first time since 1965, the president federalized the National Guard without the governor's approval, without the request of the governor, in order to create chaos, in order to escalate tensions in the region, and to create a pretext for more extreme actions in the future. So let's be clear, what you're all seeing on the news about the Los Angeles region right now is a crisis that Donald Trump has created. And he's doing it to distract from his failed agenda. And to those back in California who are watching, I have a couple messages. Number one, please peacefully protest. You have a right to peacefully protest. Second, let's not give the president what he wants. There's two things he wants. He either wants us to be quiet and go away and let him continue to overreach and abuse his power. We will not stand for that. We have First Amendment rights, and so let's peacefully protest. Second, for those who think this is an opportunity to exploit and to turn violent, to vandalize, that's exactly what Donald Trump wants. Any excuse, large or small, to continue to escalate his use of force. Let's not give him that. And to the rest of the country, I urge you to see this for what it is. Because when the headline turns on Donald Trump turns on the American people. And the truth is, California is no stranger to Trump's playbook. We've seen it before. Which brings me back to the point I have today about this EPA nomination. Now, just a few weeks ago, in this very chamber, the Senate majority, Republicans, decided to overrule the parliamentarian in order to undermine California's Clean Air Authority, authority that's existed since the original Clean Air Act was adopted decades ago. And so I don't want to let our Republican colleagues off the hook. And as the ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee, I want to make sure that the record is clear on what happened. This was the very first time in the history of this Senate that the majority decided to go nuclear to take up joint resolutions that were subject to the filibuster 1 minute, and they eliminated the legislative filibuster for them the next. They can deny it all they want, but it's written there in the record for all of us to see. And it was sparked by the Trump administration's EPA abusing the Congressional Review Act and twisting it into something that it was never intended to be. But I know they're not too worried because they're betting that through all the smoke and mirrors of procedural language, that the American people won't be able to discern what truly happened. So part of the reason I rise today is to continue to sound the alarm for the American people, because the consequences, folks, is not just the change in the rules or the change in procedure or the change in how the Senate does its business. The consequences will be physical, impacting the health, not just the lungs, but the broader health of the people of my home state of California. So I rise to remind my Republican colleagues and the EPA's current leadership that these actions will have consequences. And as long as my Republican colleagues continue to try to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people, I'm going to continue to speak up and fight back. Now, earlier this month, I announced my intent to place a blanket hold on nominees for the EPA, and I didn't do so lightly. I recognize how important it is for federal agencies to have qualified leadership, regardless of which party is in charge. I respect that. And already, in several cases, I've voted in favor of reporting the current administration's nominees out of committee. I've even voted to confirm some of them on the Senate floor, notwithstanding the political and policy differences I may have with some of them. But the Senate's constitutional role to advise and consent is an important check on the abuse and overreach of the executive branch. And abuse and overreach is exactly what Trump's EPA did in this particular situation. So my objection not only to the nomination, but to future EPA nominees is part of my duty on behalf of my constituents in the state of California. So yes, I'm objecting to expedited consideration of EPA nominees in response to the Trump EPA's abuse of the Congressional Review Act. The EPA knew that these waivers did not qualify as rules under the CRA. They have never qualified as rules under the CRA. And the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, the GAO, as well as the nonpartisan Senate parliamentarian, even affirmed that they were not subject to the CRA earlier this year. But the EPA chose to ignore that and submitted them as rules anyway, launching this unprecedented power grab. In May, I stated that I continued to hold up EPA nominees unless the Trump administration's EPA withdrew the waivers or the majority leader committed to not overturning the Senate parliamentarian on this issue. Unfortunately, the Trump administration and the Republican majority plowed ahead at the expense of the health of millions of children and families in California and many other states for that matter. They took advantage of the EPA's clear abuse of the CRA to go nuclear. First, overriding the procedural limits in the text of the CRA itself, and then second, by overturning the parliamentarian's decision, all in a quest to do away with California's clear, longstanding authority under the Clean Air Act. That's unacceptable. Because thanks to the Clean Air Act and California's authority in it for 50 years, California exercised its authority and leadership to set its own emission standards to protect the health of our residents. It was granted by Congress on a bipartisan basis in recognition of California's unique air quality challenges. And in the time since, California has done nearly all it can to reduce emissions from stationary sources of air pollution, which is what's under its jurisdiction. California has invested in R&D into cleaner locomotives because mobile sources are not within its jurisdiction, but maybe there's an indirect way we can try to impact and reduce pollution in those sectors. California's invested in port electrification Again, trying to push the envelope in areas that are not quite within its jurisdiction because it's in the federal jurisdiction. Making breakthrough in hydrogen technologies like the first hydrogen fuel cell ferry in the country. And despite all this, California still can't meet its federal clean air standards because the biggest sources of continued air pollution are mobile sources, not the stationary sources under the state's jurisdiction, the mobile sources that are in the jurisdiction of the federal government. So California's done everything it can. And now the federal government needs to step up and do its part. Do its part or get out of the way and California continue to lead. That's why these waivers are so important. Because absent the federal government doing its part, California needs the federal waivers to fill the gap, to reduce pollution further, to reach attainment, to protect the lungs and the health of Californians. But now, as a result of the Trump EPA and the Senate Republicans' abuse of the CRA, the people of California will be forced to breathe more toxic air pollution than they should have to and suffer the devastating impacts. So to hold the agency's leadership accountable for their actions, I am objecting to the Senate proceeding to all nominations for the EPA, except for the vacancy of the Inspector General. Let me be clear about that. I will maintain these objections unless acceptable accommodations are reached for the state of California to protect the health of our people. And to my Republican colleagues who may express frustration with this process, how many times have we heard you talk about, quote, cooperative federalism? Yet it seems to me that the rhetoric about cooperative federalism apparently only applies to some states, not California. Because the second it touches California's ability to regulate the air we breathe, then their states' rights claims disappear. But it's not a surprise what's going on here. From the minute Donald Trump came back into office, we knew California was a target. The president decided to not just attack California on climate, but with ICE raids, with attacks on federal funding and research grants, threats to withhold disaster aid, and more. So to President Trump and to all those who choose to target California for a political agenda, you'll soon see what California is capable of. And you'll know that it's far better to bet on California than against California. In the meantime, I'll continue to oppose these EPA nominees until the EPA reverses course and works with California, not just for California's interest, but our nation's interest. California is the most populous state in the nation, the largest economy of any state in the nation. California's success drives America's success. You rein in California's ability to lead, you restrain our country's success. So I hope we can reach an agreement in the near future. But if not, we'll continue to raise objections, and I will always stand up and defend California. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.